Hi, Waypoint. Our verse this week is 1 Corinthians 5:12, which says, "What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside?" Paul has been clear in all his writings that Christian churches must remove from their communities those known to be participating in obvious sins. They should not associate with these people if those people claim to be Christians. The purpose of this is to encourage repentance in the sinner, to protect the spiritual health of the congregation, and to avoid giving the world excuses to slander Christ. He's also been very clear that this teaching does not apply to unbelievers. Paul asks rhetorically in this verse what he has to do with judging those outside the church, meaning non-Christians. Even Paul has not been given the responsibility of judging those who have not trusted in Jesus for their salvation. He writes in the following verse that God judges unbelievers. With another rhetorical question, Paul insists that Christians do have the responsibility to judge those inside the church. In other words, Christians are called by God to hold each other accountable for ongoing participation in obviously sinful actions. Paul is giving instruction here on how churches should operate. In this whole section of 1 Corinthians, chapter 5, 9 through 13, Paul discusses Christian teachings on church discipline, conflict resolution, and the power of God to cleanse us from sins. After demanding that the church of Corinth excommunicate someone for flagrant sin, Paul reminds them that those who claim to be Christians should be held to a higher standard. Specifically, the church must not accept the fellowship of those who persist in blatant and stubborn sin. Non-believers, in contrast, aren't subject to that judgment. Paul insists that Christians must not even share a meal with someone who identifies as a Christian but refuses to stop participating in sin. But that's just the background on the verse this week. We're supposed to reflect on the verse as well. So, what does this verse mean to me? Obviously, churches must be prayerful and wise about when and how to apply Paul's instructions about 1 Corinthians 5. The goal for the church should not be self-righteousness or vindictive revenge. Rather, it should be in a protection of the truth and for repentance of the sinner. When I first read this verse, I thought about all the ways I could discuss how this verse applies to how we treat other believers and non-believers, but so many other way smarter and more qualified people than me have spoken about this numerous times. If you spent any real length of time around the church, I'm sure you've heard sermons and discussions on this topic before. But for me personally, does what I am doing as a Christian fulfill the purposes of this verse? Not as a member of the congregation of Waypoint, but do I in my everyday life live in such a way that points back to Christ and honors him? Or am I living my life in such a way that Paul would tell the Corinthian church to kick me out? How are you living your life? Have a great week.